Saturday, September 14th, and welcome to the broadcast. You know, we didn't need the media following Tuesday's presidential debate to tell us that Trump was angry, rattled, and mean. The debate was between two candidates who were passionate about their positions. Yes, they get a little loud, but that doesn't mean they're angry. It doesn't mean that they're mean or mean-spirited. The media is good at what they do. They're good at manipulating you. That's what they're trying to do. And also, Vice President Harris was exceptional, respectful, well-prepared, and very disciplined. But you know what you saw? You don't need MSNBC, CNN, and nobody else telling you what you saw. And I want to tell you this. We sent investigative reporters down to Springfield, Ohio, to investigate the shocking claims that President Trump called out. They're eating cats, they're eating dogs, they're eating dogs. Guess what? We determined that story does not have a shred of truth to it. And let me tell you this. You have to remember, especially in this day and age, lies spread fast, fake. AI images can spread too. Just because you believe something initially doesn't mean you can't change your mind and admit that it was fake. Because the realm of our coin is always trust and truth. Now, I must admit, I reported on this on our broadcast platforms. We were one of the first to put this out. And then we sent, because our group has television stations in Springfield, Cincinnati, Dayton, and we sent them out for 2 days to investigate this story, but the best of what they do. And they know what? We got it wrong. And therefore, we went back to release another video saying we got it wrong. But that's okay. We retract our stories, especially when we discover that they're fake. That's what we do. We want to tell the truth. But guess what? The mainstream media doesn't do that. There are no retractions on the Russian investigation hoax, the Hunter Biden laptop story denials. None of that ever happened. We've broken many stories here, and we will continue to do so and investigate them with fervor. I cringed when I heard former President Donald Trump repeat the fact that they were eating cats and dogs. And there are people on the internet that refuse to believe that story is anything but true. Now they're saying the governor is sending out these investigations. He's sending out the National Guard. I will tell you, we've investigated these stories, and they're not true. That's just a fact. Let me welcome our guest today, Joe Paul, who's the Executive Director of Black Men Vote, Louis Martinez, joining us for the first time, the Washington Correspondent for NTD, and Joe Griffith, research fellow in financial regulations at the Heritage Foundation. Let me welcome you both to the broadcast. What's fascinating about the recent presidential debate is that the race is still razor close. Not much has changed for either candidate. Why?
Oh, it's neck and neck, and I think part of the problem here is a lack of communication from sometimes both of the candidates about what's really threatening our long-term economic prosperity, and that's the enormous explosion of federal spending that we've seen both under President Trump and now under President Biden and Harris, and the long-term driver of that, which are the entitlement programs that neither candidate seems to want to address. I believe that many members of the public would become more enthusiastic about this election if they actually would see candidates propose a solution to these problems that are already beginning to inflict us, but are going to become much worse in the coming years.
You know, I think about healthcare. I think about my own, sometimes personal experiences. You know, I like having colonoscopies. I actually enjoy it. I've been doing it since I was in my early 20s. So, you know, I'm fortunate. Let me be the first to say that. But I had my colonoscopy set up. I asked my office to set it up, and they told me it was going to be 3 months. 3 months before I get a colonoscopy. That's insanity. So I've had my doctor for the last 35 years. I've had the same doctor. And, you know, he's old now. He's 86. And so, therefore, I've got to get adjusted to the fact of facing a new doctor. But what it is is that healthcare has become such a bureaucracy. For me, now I changed it, of course, but even with that, so when I had that experience, I went out and talked to people. What is it like going to the doctor, getting your prescriptions? First of all, they're sky high. And even when they set up appointments, sometimes 6 months later, you can die by that time. They still change it at the last minute. Was that ever part of the debate of what Americans are going through in terms of their own health care and what a nightmare it has become?
Not at all, and I think that's why the debate maybe didn't move the needle too much, because undecided voters wanted to hear about policy. They wanted to hear policy details from Kamala Harris and from President Trump, and what we saw was a competition of personalities. And it was actually quite interesting, because you'd think that politicians and their campaign managers would talk about policy as the main focus of a campaign when you have the first time Trump and Harris together face to face. But Jason Miller, right before the debate, and also the Harris campaign, highlighted how personality was going to be what dominated that debate. So no, the debate didn't move the needle for undecided voters. Education, healthcare were not mentioned. And actually foreign policy took a very predominant role during the debate, which I think right now for the American public is probably not at the top of the list. We have the economy, we have immigration. Foreign policy was at the top of the list, and a lot of time was dedicated to that.
Now listen, my man, Joe Paul, look, I watched the debate. Not only did we watch it, Kevin, my social media director, we streamed it live first time. Overwhelming feedback. Guess what got the most overwhelming feedback? And I must have tweeted out 13 or 14 different things. It's when I said that David Muir and Leslie were committing journalistic malpractice. I mean, if you're going to fact check Donald Trump, also fact check Vice President Kamala Harris. They were so biased, and I don't care how much the mainstream media tries to defend them, they were in the tank. And I can't blame that on the vice president. I'm definitely not going to blame it on Trump. As a journalist and as a media organization, you're the fourth estate. Dana Bash and her team, when they held the first debate, did a tremendous job holding both candidates accountable, not tipping the scale towards anyone, and being fair. I gave them that. But when you're in a debate, and especially if you're Donald Trump, and you've got a vice president who's on an A game, but then you also fighting the moderators who are also biased. It's just not fair. No, Joe Paul, it's just not. Yeah,
it isn't fair. It did appear to some, and we've heard some folks come back and say that it looked like it was a 3-1 battle. You know, I will say Donald Trump had an opportunity there to really shine, and he missed that opportunity a bit. I assume, right? These are my opinions. I assume that the reason why they didn't really have to fact check Kamala Harris as much is maybe she didn't lie as much as Trump. And Trump has a demonstrated history of literally spewing vitriolic, hateful lies. And so you kind of have to fact check to be as on the board and as level as possible. Right? The debate last night or a couple nights ago was more than just another political spectacle. You know, it was a really critical moment that laid bare the stark differences between these two visions for America. You know, on one side we had former President Donald Trump, who's a master at media theatrics, right? And you saw the playbook come out. I mean, he has some zingers that are still memorable, but he's always known for how to rally his base around his bravado and his punchlines. But in this debate, his bravado met his match, right? Kamala Harris seemed like she was prepared. She was a little nervous at first. But she looked like she was prepared. She brought something to the stage that Trump simply couldn't counter, right? Which is a blend of this sharp intellect. She seemed overly prepared, and she seemed calm. She seemed poised. She had this steady hand of a leader, and prepared to navigate the complexities of our time. So it's going to be very, very interesting moving forward. And I don't even know, Armstrong, if another debate is going to happen or not. But I'd sit front seat to watch that.
So let me challenge Mr. Paul here. The fact of what Vice President Harris said about creating jobs, those jobs were created out of COVID. That was just absolutely and patently false. Let me just start there. And when Mr. Muir asked the former president about whether or not he said that he slightly lost the election by the skin or whatever, and then Trump says that he was being sarcastic, it was not true, then he challenged him on it. he challenged him on his answer, as if to say, who are you going to believe, me, Mr. Trump, or believe the moderator? So there is no question on areas that they challenged the former president on that that Vice President Harris wasn't challenged. But of all the things that Mr. Paul just said, and I think this is the point, and you talk to a lot of people following these debates. I mean, people are really struggling. This America and this light and this happy, good feeling and happy-go-lucky that Vice President Harris talks about is not the reality of people's lives. People are a paycheck away from not being able to pay their mortgage, their rent. Some people think they're going to be homeless. Some people are buying food sometimes once a week, every 2 weeks, because they just don't have the money. They pinch and scrape just to save and put food on the table. This is the reality. Now, look, you and I, we live different lives. We've obviously, that is not the story of our life. But look, I have family members. I have people that I know that live these lives every day. I don't want people to think that we're isolated and we're not connected to how Americans are struggling. And what Americans wanted to hear is that when will Americans be first again? It seems like you take care of everybody else, the migrants. Nancy Pelosi, $150,000 houses in San Francisco, $1,000 in free cell phones when they come here. They get housing, they get health care, they get to go into these classrooms. Some of them get driver's license. They go on the streets, and you're not going to like this. They're intoxicated, and what do? Give them a ticket? No consequences. They're back on the street again. People lose their lives. That's just the reality of the situation. Americans want to know, when is America going to work for them again?
So yesterday I went to watch that Reagan movie, and there was that quote, famous Reagan quote, that are you better now than you are 4 years ago? So when I see the debate and I saw all the mainstream media say how Kamala Harris did such a great job and wiped the floor and was so alpha female, I think was Political Playbook's title, I'm thinking this is the incumbent administration. So I don't think Harris actually managed to untangle herself from the Biden policies. And the Biden policies are what Americans are living. So I think to challenge our other guest, Americans are seeing no new proposals by the Harris-Biden administration or the Biden-Harris administration, however you want to call it. So it's a continuation of their current situation. So Trump being defensive, Trump taking it, Trump just staring at the camera, not looking at Harris during the debate was his role, I think. I think he just had to hold his ground because he's not the incumbent. He's actually proposing something that the Americans also have already had a taste of. And, some people have a really good memory of the economic situation during the Trump years and is not the current administration. So if you want to change, Harris didn't put up an argument that she is changed from the present situation, which you just explained is not the best.
Say whatever you want to say, and I want us to be balanced here. What Trump said about immigration resonated with just about everybody. No matter how much they may have criticized him and said whatever they said, they believe that he's right on immigration. And that issue is an albatross around the Biden-Harris neck. And she has been the co-pilot for the last 4 years.
Yeah, we know that border crossings have grown exponentially over the last 3.5 years, not to mention the changes to the asylum program, which is allowing people to stay here unlawfully for an indefinite period of time. This is a very real problem. But back to Harris and the question that was first posed to her about whether or not we're better off now than 4 years ago, she refused to answer that question. And the data are very clear, right? The typical family is earning $3,000 less a year right now, adjusted for inflation. That's not even including these other costs, such as revolving debt. If you've got a typical revolving debt balance, you're paying close to $2,500 a year now on interest compared to just $1,300 a year 3 years ago. And then on the housing side, which I think is the #1 issue for a lot of families that are looking to buy a better home or get into a home for the first time, the all-in costs of a mortgage, property taxes, insurance, annual costs have risen by $23,000 per year over the last 3 years.
Wow, hold that point. I'm Armstrong Williams. We'll be back. You know, I remember my first political convention in 1984 with Ronald Reagan. And I must tell you, during the 80s, the 90s, and also clearly almost into the 2000s, the country was clearly, in my mind, right center. Now, let me be clear. This leaning was more than just the voting preferences of Americans also. And that center-right slant on balance could be said of voters through much of, like I said, the 80s, the 90s. Now, George Bush, I remind you, won states such as Washington in his first presidential bid on an anti-gay agenda. For example, even President Barack Obama struggled with the issue of same-sex union during his first term as yet another example. But that core tenet of American ideology has fundamentally shifted. And this election of 2024 could well cement the recognition that the country has now pivoted in a clear and demonstrable way toward the center-left. It is a shift as stark as it has been quick. So let me say this to you. America today is more diverse. What do I mean by more diverse? Older, less white, less religious, less loyal to the institutions this nation was founded upon. That's not a criticism as much as it is a reflection of a postmodern society leaning with independence, less tethered to traditional morality, and more loyal to a new belief structure. You know what that belief structure is? If it feels good, then it must be right for me. But like many cultural changes before it, the center-left realignment traces its roots back to social issues. Inculcated in Americans' urban cities, their centers, and nurtured in a climate where social media, let me talk about social media, only place more distance between us and guess what? Our neighbors. Cultural leaders didn't raise binary questions such as, is this wrong? Or challenge untrue realities such as gender for fear of offending individuals. And in some respects, these shifts honor what contributed to America's greatness, private property and the belief structure of, well, so long as they do in the privacy of their own home. Haven't you said that before? Who am I to question it? Haven't you heard that? Well, let me tell you. The institutions that contribute to the building blocks of society, schools, family, worship centers, culture centers, universities, turn a blind eye. Or at best, they fail to see the cumulative toll such tolerance would take on the public. All the while ushering in, yes, a progressive wave that only grew more coordinated and sophisticated by the day. We see that in the protests across the country. It's more coordinated and sophisticated. So let me just say this. The center-left mindset has definitely seeped into the American political class. Voters no longer gasp when elected officials defy morality, do drugs, support terrorist organizations, question America's role in the world. They face American forefathers change history to suit new narratives. Louis, what has happened?
Well, I think that if we look at the Democratic Party and what they've done since the Obama years is that they found identity politics to be like an oil well for votes, you know? So they thought that with identity politics, they could grow their base, secure the elections going forward. And of course, we also know that the immigration debate, some people speculate that the open borders policy is just seeking future votes and down the line, right? The miscalculation, though, is that identity politics, like you mentioned, is about feelings, and that can only get you that so far. So after, you know, what was it, like the last 16 years, 8 years have been, Obama 2 years, 12 of the last 16 have been with Democrats, and now we're realizing what that means, but governing with vibes, governing with emotions. We have
feel good, like the Democratic Convention.
Yeah, but you can walk down the streets of any U.S. major city and you understand the decline that has happened in the past 16 years, and that's the lack of policy. But now you have, and I think Hispanics is a really great opportunity to examine, because 20% of Hispanics who are going to vote in this elections are under 30. So these are like fourth generation, third generation Hispanics, and identity politics, like trying to play into the color of their skin or their cultural heritage is not as important as their pockets, as should be, because it's a reality that we're living and the things that we have to be responsible for. So I think that identity politics was a way for the left to gain a foothold in the power system of the United States, but now we're going to see the pendulum swing, right? You're going to see undecided voters to choose the next president. And if you, again, look at Hispanics, the number of Hispanics in every battleground state is larger than the margin of error that divides Harris and Trump. So what I'm trying to say is that both political parties have to recalculate how they get votes. Obviously, one would like them to get votes through group policies and through actually achieving something for the American people. And I think that will be forced upon them by the voters because they're asking for better conditions.
Mr. Paul, your thoughts?
The political landscape in America right now is much more fluid than it's ever been, right, in decades. I agree with some of the points that the gentleman made, but while there's signs that the country is leaning slightly towards the center-left, it's much more accurate to say that the nation is in a state of recalibration, right, rather than a decisive pivot. I don't think we're in a decisive pivot. On one hand, you see a growing support for issues traditionally associated with the left or center-left, like expanded health care, climate action, gun control, protecting voter rights, et cetera. But these aren't really just partisan issues anymore. They're becoming mainstream. They're becoming something that every American experiences. Young voters, suburban moderates, and even some independents they're increasingly supportive of policies that emphasize social justice, right? We've seen that with the folks who show up at the rallies. Economic fairness, right? We just talked about that, Armstrong. There are a lot of folks who are struggling in the country right now. More importantly, environmental responsibility. So we've seen this reflected in recent elections where candidates with moderate or progressive platforms, they performed well, even in battleground states. And you're going to see that this election. And so because it's becoming much more mainstream and less one side over the other. Now, I do want to say what we're seeing, though, is a rejection of the extremes. People are now coming more center than they have been to the left or the right. Voters, they seem to be gravitating towards this pragmatic solution that candidates can provide, and the candidates who have the ability or can show that they have the ability to work across the aisle is going to be critical. In that sense, yeah, maybe the center-left is gaining some ground, but not because of ideology, right? But because of this growing desire for stability and competence, and not talking about people are eating cats and dogs, right? We're more focused as a country on forward-looking policies that address real-world problems without the divisiveness, right? We're done with that. It's time to move on, right? So is America, to answer your question, Armstrong, is America pivoting to the center-left? It's trending that way, right? But it doesn't mean that's the ultimate direction that we'll end up in. And it depends on literally how effective each side, and now under Trump and Kamala, can appeal to the broad middle of the electorate and stop really going back and forth with this political chaos that everybody's kind of tired of. We're ready for solutions that make sense.
Joe, what's fascinating when you think about the role of social media and social media journalists, they're not held to the standards of broadcast owners such as myself. So they don't have to worry about the filters, they don't have to worry about the accountability. But also, they can also be used as useful tools for propaganda that spread. Obviously, when you have a presidential debate and the only thing that people are talking about is Trump saying they're eating cats and they're eating dogs, nothing else he said really mattered. This is what they're interested in. This is what's going to get them followers. And this is what the world looks at. And we become a laughingstock. And so we become tools of misinformation and propaganda of people that realize they cannot beat us by might or force, but they can beat us by turning us within and destroying ourselves inside our country instead of outside.
Yeah, we have become a far less literate country over the past few decades, and as you mentioned with social media, so many individuals are utilizing that as their primary news source, as their perspective on what is happening. Fewer people are reading newspapers, magazines, and books, and a lot of this stems directly to our education system. If you look at the curriculum, I can look back to myself in elementary school back in the 80s and looking at the book list that I had and what I had to develop as a critical thinker and reading comprehension and writing about what I was reading. And I can look at what my much younger siblings were taking in public school. those types of critical thinking skills just simply were not being taught. And this is a nationwide phenomenon. And so it's no surprise now that as we're 20 years out of this phenomenon, people were moving away from books and then to television and now to social media, it's no surprise that we have seen a shift. And I wish I could share our other guests' enthusiasm. We're becoming a less extreme type of country. But if you look at the product of the public schools and of the universities, many of these children and young adults are not moderates. They are hard left, and that's not an accident. This is an orchestrated campaign, the cultural march through the institutions that has intentionally shifted an entire generation's way of thinking about our country, our West, and our founding values, and our political system now is bearing fruit of that disaster.
Does it, you know, this is hinted upon in the debate, Louis, that, you know, people saw the ouster of Joe Biden by Nancy Pelosi and Barack Obama and Chuck Schumer to a less extent as a coup d'etat. And Harris has never challenged. She was coordinated. I mean, they could see that as a coup d'etat. They forced them to make sure that no one challenged her because in the name of unifying the party. And even now, you hear very little from the President of the United States.
I thought it was interesting during the debate that the Trump assassination attempt wasn't discussed. He was only mentioned once, and it was by Trump when he said probably the things that you have been saying about me cost me getting shot at. And also, yeah, that switching of candidates, and it just hasn't been emphasized. I was thinking earlier this morning, like there was an obvious reason why the first debate with Joe Biden was in early June and not how every other election year later on during that campaign. So this seems like it was coordinated beforehand. And yeah, the president isn't commanding, he isn't the one leading the nation. And apparently Kamala Harris in every interview and during the debate performance pretty much presented herself like she was the one making the decisions with allies in NATO. She was the one negotiating with Zelensky and like preparing them, giving them the intel briefing before the invasion. So if I were the American public who was undecided and questioning, it'd be like, then who has been governing the past 4 years? Because it's either Biden and then this person doesn't have the experience, or it's Kamala Harris who has been lying to us then for the past 3 years as to the state of mind of the president, as to whether he was going to be the best candidate or not for the Democratic Party. And then going back to what our guest here was also commenting on, the coordinated disinformation in the United States.
I want to come back to the coordinated disinformation. We're going to take a break. This is Armstrong Williams. Don't go away. We'll be back. Oh, boy, my time was perfect. What? The lights went out. Steve, the lights went out.
It is easier to build up strong children than to try and repair broken men.
The streets are plagued with crime, violence, there's a lot of poverty, and it's all a result of lack of education that's happening in our schools. So it really is a crisis.
We come from very different political perspectives, but we've come to the same conclusion, and that is there is a crisis in the classroom. Children are being deprived of quality of life because they're being deprived of a good education. We must solve this problem. It's incumbent upon all of us to join hands together to get this done.
We can't afford to wait one more day before we address these issues, because every day we lose another child.
Let's stop the politicking. Let's stop the games. Let's really do something to give these kids a real chance at life and being a part of that American dream.
We need accountability for funding. Many of the districts where you're seeing very low test scores, students graduating with very low literacy and math comprehension rates, they are receiving a lot of funding. So where is the money going where our kids aren't being adequately educated?
If you believe every child is deserving of a quality education, please go to educationjusticefoundation.com. And welcome back with Louis and Joel. And joining us now is Logan Delany. Logan, in listening to this past week's debate, what did you learn from both candidates about the future of the American economy and inflation?
I think both candidates missed the real keys of what America's problem is right now. And one of it is that we have too much debt. We have large budgets. We have a Social Security problem that's looming, and neither of the candidates addressed those issues.
Is it because the moderators did not feel that the topics were worthy for discussion?
I don't know why they didn't.
You can only address an issue if you ask the question.
Yeah. If I were a moderator, I would have asked the question, what do you intend to do about the deficit? What would you intend to do about the amount of treasury debt that we have that's huge, the Social Security trust fund, and which is about to run out of money within the next half dozen years or so. I mean, we have some major problems that are facing us that are fiscal problems, and it seems to me that neither of the candidates is addressing those.
So I want to come back to this because Louis said early on that he was somewhat surprised that foreign policy weighed so heavily in the debate, and he also indicated that it's not a priority to the American people. And you also talked about the issues that were discussed at the debate, but you also said something else very interesting, Joel, that Americans have become ignorant. And I always remember in campaigns, they asked the candidate to speak as if you're talking to a seventh grader. Could it be, Logan, that ABC, when they were deciding the topics or discussion, is that they did not want to remind the American people what their economics are in this country and how fragile they have become? Or is it they don't believe that the American people are intelligent enough to understand, even though they live this every day? Or maybe they did not want a substantive debate. Maybe they wanted one of sound bites and zingers and entertainment, because television has become entertainment. But what is it? Does it really make people's lives better and richer and more informed? What does it say about the mainstream media?
Well, it says that the mainstream media is less interested in going after what the critical issues are in America. They take some headline moves that are important and cultural issues which are important and easier to understand. And economics and understanding the economy, it's not simple. It's very complicated, but you can reduce some of it to very simple checkbook type of economics that most people should be able to understand.
But you know what? It's not complicated, Louis. Why? Because people live it every day. They see it every day. They feel it every day. They complain about it every day.
Yeah, I think by now, the American public knows what inflation is. They know because they felt it, and I think that the basic concepts of inflation are also not missed by the American public. I think it is mainstream media wanting to dumb down the content because the content, it's a product that they're selling, not an information that they're providing. So when it comes back to the debate, for example, the pushback, Kamala Harris's proposal of giving a $25,000 down payment there wasn't no pushback from the moderators on the probable inflation that could cost, or the high prices of housing, because that's just the.
Are you assuming that the moderators understood it themselves?
That would be interesting, but if we've been talking about inflation for the past 3 years, specifically because this government has just spent and spent and spent and spent, I think the American public understands that if you spend more than you have, this is what happens.
And I think, unfortunately, candidates on both sides of the aisles are misdiagnosing the root cause of this problem. If you look at what Kamala Harris has been saying, blaming inflation on corporate greed when we know that profit margins, especially in the food sector, are actually shrinking, that's not the culprit. But then on the right and on the populist side, we see a lot of folks that are blaming inflation and the lower and the higher cost of living on China. Well, that's not the primary driver either. We need to see them accept responsibility for the problem that they have caused. It's not just been Democrats, it's not just been Republicans. They worked together, starting during the COVID era, to finance this gusher of federal spending by using the printing presses at the Fed. And this is a once-in-a-generation opportunity to help the public fully connect the dots, because guess what? If we did not like the inflation of the past 3 years, it's going to be far worse 5 to 10 years from now when our trust fund for Social Security is bust, because at that point, politicians got to make a choice. Do they cut the entitlement benefits 20% plus across the board? They're not going to do that. Are they going to raise taxes dramatically to 40% plus in the middle class? Not likely going to happen. What are they going to resort to pay for these entitlements? They're going to resort to the Federal Reserve printing dollars to buy bonds, just like the Fed did during the COVID shutdown. If we didn't like the 6 to 8% inflation of a few years ago, imagine what it would be like to face that type of inflationary costs each and every year for decades. If we don't address the entitlement system now, that is what will happen in just about a decade from now. And neither candidate is talking about this.
You know, the other thing that Mr. Trump mentioned during the debate, you know, when Republicans are upset with the former president because they felt he missed the ball, he missed the mark. And don't take it from me. Look at the Wall Street Journal, look at Fox News, Neil Cavuto. But again, Americans know what they saw, they know what they heard. But Trump did mention the impact that not only that immigration has on jobs and crime in this country, he talked about the impact that immigration, illegal immigration, and an overflow of it can have on the economy of the United States. Logan, put that in perspective for us.
Well, when you have a lot of people coming over the border who are willing to work for less than the prevailing wage in America, that has an impact on the American worker. And it, you know, if you look at the services, the unskilled and semi-skilled services in America, and you look at who's filling those, there are a large number of illegal immigrants working in that sector of the economy.
So let's pivot to something else, and I'm gonna come back to you for this. We're spending so much money on foreign conflict, so much money on foreign conflict, and when it's all said and done, what will Americans really have to show for that? And what kind of, in terms of the progress, and does it really make us safer here at home, as they once said, if we fight them over there, we won't have to fight them here?
No, I think it's an important question. And when we talk about national defense spending in general, including the foreign aid, as a percentage of our economy, it's actually been shrinking. It's been shrinking for decades now, dating back to post 9/11. It's a smaller share of our economy. And I see a lot of politicians on both sides talking about the wasted dollars on foreign aid and how this is a burden. And it's true, there are some of those dollars that are being wasted, and we're not holding the recipients accountable. But when I see politicians blame our deficits on that and ignoring the fact that it's the entitlement systems and the enormous areas of wasteful spending outside of foreign aid, that is a multiple of 50 plus of what we're spending on foreign aid, it tells me that a lot of those politicians are just looking for a scapegoat to blame our problems on, rather than actually discuss the very politically difficult questions of how do we address these entitlement programs.
You know, we're gonna take a break. Paul Stone is gonna join us when we return. I want to thank both of you guys for joining us for such a intelligent, insightful, neutral discussion, not only about the vice presidential debate, but also about the issues that people really care about. Okay, and when we come back, Paul Stone will join us, and Logan will continue as we talk about what is it there that Americans can do, not only to grow their wealth, but to save themselves from financial disaster. We'll be back.
As a home buyer, you need a lender who cares about your home ownership dreams. United Security Financial has been helping families secure their dream homes for 30 years. We're a national fair practice lender that provides affordable mortgages and low down payment programs to eligible home buyers. To learn how United Security Financial can help you secure your dream home, call 1-800-373-4186.
There he is, the
How are
chairman
you?
and CEO of Colonial Metals Group, Paul Stone. Welcome back to the broadcast.
Thank you for having me. It's great to be here.
You know, obviously, for full disclosure, Colonial Metals is a sponsor of our show. And long before I knew anything about Colonial Metals, you know, I've invested a lot of resources into metals, gold, silver, coins, and it's incredible what the return I've been able to accumulate over the years. And so people are always asking, share investment opportunities, share opportunities that people, Americans, that are affordable, they're not taking advantage of. So we're happy to have Colonial Metals Group as a sponsor of our broadcast. Paul, talk about, and Joel Griffith also is joining us from the Heritage Foundation, who's an expert. He loves talking about the economy and the things that really work for the economy in terms of investors. You know, a lot of people, while they may gain in the economy, they lose a lot of their money. They take chances, investing in things that are not tried and solid, like gold and blue chip companies, and they take this risk. And everybody wants to be secure for the future. And I don't care who you talk to. If you ask everybody what they want to be financially independent. I'm not going to say they want to be rich. And why do they want to be financially independent, Paul? They want to be able to take care of their family. They want to be able to, in case there's an emergency, they can rise to the occasion to pay the cost because they understand the unforeseen how life works. And everybody is looking for something to grow their wealth and give their children an opportunity to have a better life than themselves. And we're not talking about people who are affluent. We're talking about everyday Americans who want better for their kids and a secure financial future.
Right. Yeah. To me, they're looking for the visibility that for many years to come and decades to come, they can handle the unknown that comes and challenges them, out of the blue. They're looking for that visibility. So to them, it would be either a giant income, and that's kind of elusive, hard to come by, right? Those jobs either take a long time to obtain higher income levels or specialized backgrounds and degrees. The other way is through investing, growing what they make, the extra that they can set aside and seeing that grow. I would say that because of the government printing press, it presses against everyone to be in this frenzied, distracted quandary for how do I get above the trouble that the government is creating for me. While they print money, they cause commodity prices to go higher and the cost of living goes higher. So it could force people into making, hasty investment decisions or risking things they ought not to take risks on to try and feel like they're finally getting ahead and starting to see that vision that they're going to be solid at some point.
What do you think are the 4 primary locations to invest your money?
Oh, yeah, that's my thing. So if we try to take a simpler approach to making investment choices more on a macro level, and by the way, I'm not an investment advisor, I'm not a trained economist, but I'm just a lay person, and this is what makes sense to me. It's cash in a safe at home. So you could have all your money in the form of cash, right? You could have it anywhere, but just physical $100 bills, right? All of your savings could go into real estate. That would be number 2. The investment world or the vault, the safe at home or the depository. And to get there, you'd switch into gold and silver. And that's the one thing by itself that is out of the dollar. You're completely out of the dollar, the US dollar, that the government is destroying by printing the dollar in an attempt to try to solve its problems. It's creating problems no one can solve.
Joe, why are you shaking your head?
I fully agree. And when you think about gold versus the dollar, here's something to keep in mind. If you would have put $10,000 cash in a vault, say 100 years ago, at that point, you would have been able to buy a house with that $10,000 in that vault. Fast forward to today, that $10,000, you're not even going to get your landscaping done on that house with that cash that was stored in that vault. If you would have stored 1,500 ounces of gold in a vault 100 years ago, and you unlocked that vault today, you could have bought a house 100 years ago with that gold in that vault, and today you open up that vault, and guess what? that 1,000 ounces of gold still buys you a house.
Well,
absolutely.
How is it that precious metals compare to other investment options? And Paul, why they continue to be so reliable?
Well, the way it's built, by design, gold and silver can't be made in the lab. We can't suddenly just find, an enormous amount of it and bring it up to the surface of the earth. From what I've read, on average, it takes 10 to 15 years for a gold mine to produce notable amounts of gold and silver, right? So that nothing can instantly happen to offset the way things work by finding a giant amount of it all of a sudden. It can't be created by the government, right? And the government has moved away from gold and silver, right? They're moving towards other things like modern monetary theory, where money's just a commodity and the government farms that commodity and can produce as much of it as it wants. Mathematically, it can. It's just that the money ends up with no value at some point. Today, the dollar's only worth 2.7 cents. So if you strip all the artificial money out of the economy, the Niagara Falls amount of money that pours into our economy every second of every day for many, many decades now, then you don't have asset values lifted so insanely high, right? You would think, and you wouldn't have inflation like we have, right? So you'd have a higher level of interest rate, normalized interest rates. You could put your money in a CD at 5 or 6%. You don't even have to really feel like you're risking it. You aren't forced into risky investments if you're getting a decent return and you can think, all right, I'm 20, I'll save all this money for the next 30 years while I'm working. By the time I'm done, I'll have a great amount of savings to retire on. Right? But when we get into times where we have to goose the system, take interest rates to zero, borrowing the dollar is free, printing tons of money, then you can't get a return on safe things or steady things. And that's what causes, historically speaking, from my analysis, what causes gold and silver to go higher. So while you're making money, while you, Armstrong, were making money or seeing a nice return on your gold and silver over the many decades you've been working with it, it's been the government printing press causing your gold and silver to go higher. So another way to look at it is it's a signal flare telling you, it's a giant billboard outside everyone's neighborhood saying, warning, the government is destroying your country's currency. Don't be in that currency when it fails.
So how do precious metals perform during economic downturns?
Yeah, I mean, so when you think about the fear factor, or this is what drives people into or forces them into thinking, oh, I want my money relocated out of what I'm scared about, right? So if it's the markets, if it's the real estate, if it's the dollar itself, or any dollar-based, dollar-driven investment, you're thinking, if I leave that locale for where there's something that is scarce, hard to come by, the whole world has seen, the whole human race has seen and shown that it has an incredible value, and it's a trapped asset, it's limited in supply, then the value, the price of it goes higher, right? So it's when crisis hits, gold and silver reacts very positively to that because there's not much of it. There's always a ton more money than there are ounces. So when you have this massive herd, or if you pictured an elephant falling into a bathtub, the elephant is the money and the bathtub is a small amount of gold and silver that splashes prices higher.
Joe?
Yeah, I fully agree with that. If you look at the basket of goods that an ounce of gold could purchase 100 years ago, or go back 150 years, in terms of a pound of flour or a basket of oranges, it has been astoundingly stable over the past century and a half. If you look at the basket of goods that 1 ounce can purchase. And something too, when we think about the possible collapse of the US dollar, it has been now a gradual collapse since the establishment of the Federal Reserve. The dollar has lost roughly 97% of its purchasing power over the past century, while gold has completely maintained its ability to purchase the goods and services that you need.
So I've got to ask Paul this, and I know people are thinking about this in the back of their mind, the risk of investing in gold and silver.
Sure, what would be the risks? Well, I think mankind worries a great deal about things that don't end up happening, right? So I think the initial fear one confronts is just the fear of change itself. Thank God we can get past that, or we'd be a party of one everywhere we go. Women, would only have one child because it's kind of scary, or maybe none because it's so scary to think about, what do I do when I become a mother? So these big life decisions, relocating one's savings away from what you're used to something you're not used to, could feel like a risk. When we look historically at gold and silver, again, I don't have a crystal ball, but when we look backwards, right, there's an old quote, the further backwards we can look, the further forward we can see. And we can see governments of reserve currency countries don't maintain that status for very long. 80 years is the average time span. It also shows that governments that prevail over reserve currency countries destroy those countries' hardy finances that we once enjoyed. And you end up with a great deal of angst and chaos and social unrest when you're at the end. So when we look at what are the risks in gold and silver, some might say, well, I can't go shopping with it. Now I've tied all my money up in something I can't go shopping with. You can't go shopping at Walmart with stock in Walmart, right? So we're always in a position where we're gonna live. I can't go shopping with real estate.
But the good news is if you can't go shopping with it, you're not spending it like you spend everything else. It forces you to save it. That's the answer. Yes.
So the risks of gold and silver, I could say, well, it's not as liquid as cash, right? But it turns back to any cash, depending on whatever country you're in with a phone call. You can come out of gold and silver very easily. Local coin shops, the place you acquired it through, like us, you give us a call back. Hey, I want out of my precious metals. Great. And we discuss the exit from your precious metals position, and you're turned back into money.
Paul, you got to tell us the 1-800 number for people that want to engage and learn more about Colonial Metals Group.
Yeah, we've got that special number for you and your audience. We have a special landing page, online for you and your audience. If not, certainly just look us up, colonialmetalsgroup.com. Our number's right there on the website, or you can give us your number. We'll call. We'll talk with you where it's convenient.
We'll place our number on the screen. It's always a great listening to your wisdom and your sincerity, and it's just always good. Thank you so much for joining us. I want to thank Joel. I want to thank Louis. I want to thank Logan, Delany, and all our guests, Joe Paul, who joined us today for this broadcast. Enjoy the rest of your weekend, and check out Colonial Metals. Check it out on our website, ArmstrongWilliams.com.
It was great meeting you, Joel, and thanks for having me back, Armstrong.
It's all gold. It's always a pleasure. We'll continue having you back.
Thank
Go
you.
gold, baby. Gold medal.